for having us, partnering up with us and letting us host today's. Actually, it's the fourth installment of our four-part series that we started with Natisel this year, and we're looking forward to next year collaborating with all of you again. So we're going to start our fourth installment just now. We're the Center for Literacy and Learning, and our mission is to advance literacy and learning through evidence-based practices in the classroom, home, and community with a vision that everyone is empowered through literacy. So I'm going to introduce our team. Today, I will be presenting with my director, Sabrina Marsh. So I'm going to let her introduce herself. There she is.
You've already introduced me. That's good. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here and enjoying the opportunity to partner with Natizo to do the work that we have done thus far in our first three sessions. And hopefully the fourth is as engaging as the previous three.
Thank you, Sabrina. My name is Brenda Mallara, and I'm also a family engagement specialist with the Louisiana Statewide Family Engagement Center. We're here in the lovely state of Louisiana, and we provide family engagement services to all the school districts throughout the state, and we also partner up with educators and parents just to bring back the concept of family engagement. We also have Lakeisha London on our team and Lauren Sisk on our team. Lauren has presented before with me, so you might recognize her. And all of us enjoy what we do and hope that the information that we will provide to you today is helpful. So today's presentation is helping multilingual families understand federal and local education laws, empowering families through clear, culturally relevant guidance on education rights. So we're going to be giving you some information that hopefully you can use in the work that you do every day with the parents and the educators. Our objectives for today's presentation are to educate you, interpreters and translators, on key education laws impacting the multilingual families. Also, to provide tools for navigating legal and educational terminology. And finally, to empower the participants to advocate for our multilingual families' rights and access to the services that they have. And this is very important. Why does this matter? It matters because your role as interpreters and translators is critical and to provide educational equity. Also to impact the miscommunication on student outcomes. Sometimes if there's that miscommunication, the student is severely affected. And then the legal obligations for the schools under federal law. So the key federal education laws are IDEA, which the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also Free Appropriate Public Education, known as FAPE, Individualized Education Programs, or IEPs, ESEA and ESSA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Every Student Succeeds Act, Title I and Title III, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and then language access and anti-discrimination mandate. On local and state level laws, depending on the state that you are in and the state that you work in, you should have an overview of relevant state-specific mandates. So not every state is the same, so you should be familiar with the particular laws in your state. We're here in Louisiana, so we are always trying to keep up with what's happening in our state. Also, language access policies in the local school districts that you work in. And then to be familiar or get familiar with examples of implementation challenges and solutions. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Sabrina, and she will take care of legal and educational terminology.
So we're going to talk a bit about legal and educational terminology, and it's important as interpreters and translators that you're familiar with the terminology, because then it makes it easier for you to explain exactly what sometimes confusing language might mean to families that you are supporting through the process. So one of the things that is constantly referred to under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Act, is the least restrictive environment. And it's often referred to as LRE. And it's important to know that LRE stands for least restrictive environment, because oftentimes if you are supporting families during IEP meetings, people will begin to speak using a lot of acronyms, and it's important to make sure families understand what those acronyms mean. So LRE means that students with disabilities must be educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. So special classes, separate schooling, or any other removal from the regular education environment should only occur if the severity of the disability that the student has is such that the education can't be received in a regular class without some substantive supports. So it's important to help families understand exactly what LRE means when it comes up in conversation. So this is kind of an explanation of LRE in practice. It ensures that students have the same access to the same educational opportunities as their peers. So it's important that you're aware that decisions about placement must be individualized and made by the IEP team, which includes the parent. So knowing that when you walk into that IEP meeting to support a family, that when they start talking about LRE, it should not be a decision that's already made before the meeting takes place. It should happen through conversation with the parent in the course of the meeting. Due process under IDEA refers to the procedures, the legal procedures that parents and schools can use to resolve disputes regarding a child's education, regarding what is in a student's IEP, for example. Schools are obligated to provide parents with written notice of the school decisions. Um, Parents have the right to request mediation or an impartial due process hearing. And they also have the right to be able to appeal those decisions through the court system. So it's important for parents to know when you are supporting them that the IEP meeting, it is a meeting where everyone has input and everyone has an opportunity to participate in that decision-making process. Due process protects the legal rights of both the parents as well as the school. And as interpreters, you play a critical role in ensuring that parents fully understand these rights and that they're able to participate in a meaningful way through the dispute resolution process if any disputes arise. Assessment accommodations. So assessment accommodations are alterations in the way that tests are administered or the way that students are allowed to respond to assessment items if they have been identified as having disabilities or if they have been identified as English language learners. These accommodations are implemented without changing the validity or the construct of the test. So some examples of what students might have access to might be something like having additional time or having access to a bilingual dictionary or being able to take their assessments one-on-one or in a small group environment. Or in some instances, students that are English language learners may have translated test instructions. So just an explanation of what that looks like in practice. These accommodations ensure equity in the assessment, and they have to be aligned with what the student uses in instruction. So you may be involved in IEP meetings or 504 meetings or EL plan meetings where all kinds of supports are discussed with parents. and it must be clearly communicated how the various accommodations are used in instruction, as well as why they matter. And the reason that's important is because if a student is given any of these specific accommodations during the instructional process, so during a regular class period, students are allowed to have those same accommodations during the testing period. It's really important that parents understand that. Free and appropriate public education, oftentimes you hear that referred to as FAPE. So when schools and school districts are talking to families about FAPE, FAPE is the guarantee that students with disabilities receive personalized education and related services at no cost to the family, and that those services are designed to meet their unique needs and to prepare them for either further education, employment, and/or independent living. And this is a right that is protected under the laws supporting IDEA and 504, the American Disabilities Act. So an explanation of FAPE in practice is that FAPE is a foundational right. Interpreters should be helping to ensure that families understand the services that their child or that their children are entitled to, how those decisions are made, and what steps that they can take if their child is not receiving appropriate support. An individual education program. So that is an IEP. An IEP is a legally binding written plan developed for each public school child who is eligible under IDEA. And it's very important that you make sure parents understand the difference in the IEP versus the IAP. It outlines the child's present level of performance. It lists annual goals. It identifies clearly the services that the student is to be provided. It is to also identify clearly how the progress towards those performance goals will be measured. And it also includes how the child will have the opportunity to participate in the general education setting. So an explanation in practice, and we talked about this a couple of times. IEPs are created by a team that must include the parent, and it must be clearly understood. Interpreters, you can ensure that families have meaningful opportunities to participate in those IEP meetings, and that they fully understand their child's rights and their progress. So the other area where students with disabilities are protected is under Section 504, and it's Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Students with disabilities who do not qualify for special education under IDEA may still receive accommodations to help ensure equal access to education. An explanation of this in practice is that 504 plans may include classroom and testing accommodations, things like preferential seating, opportunities for extended time. And as I said a few minutes ago, interpreters must communicate the difference between 504 and IEPs, especially when families are new to the US school systems. And sometimes even families that are experienced in the school system still need some support around understanding the difference between an IEP and an IAP, and understanding the difference between whether or not their child is in special education or whether or not they are being protected by Section 504. Language access and services are protected under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it requires that all schools receiving federal funds must take reasonable steps to ensure that meaningful access to information and programs are available for individuals with limited English proficiency. And I know there has been some movement around a lot of things in our current political climate, but this act is still in place, and it is still a federal mandate that ensures support for those families with limited English proficiency. So what does this look like in practice? Schools are legally obligated to provide interpretation and translation services for families. This includes that schools have to provide support for those IEP and IAP meetings. For report cards, they must also have support for families around enrollment documents, disciplinary actions as well. And it's important as interpreters we ensure that families understand this right and that we help schools to comply. IDA and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act ensure that parents have the right to participate in educational decision-making processes, including the identification of eligibility, decisions around placement, as well as decisions around service delivery. And schools have to make every effort to involve parents, including the provision of interpretation services. Looking at what parent participation looks like in practice. Interpreters help to uphold this right by enabling parents to actively participate and be informed of their right to participate in these meetings, making sure they understand the surveys, the conference documents, and the communication with the school staff. And Brenda is going to provide some additional supports around strategies for interpreting legal and educational jargon.
Thanks, Sabrina. So I know that depending on the companies that you work for, or if you're a freelancer, there are certain rules that you need to follow. So hopefully these tips will help you, and if you can apply them, please use them. So we recommend that you use plain language equivalents. For example, break down all the technical terms into simpler language before translating. So you'll know the families that you'll be working for, and you'll be able to possibly talk to them before the meeting starts. So you'll be able to gauge where they are and how you're going to explain, when you start interpreting the different terms. So for example, instead of directly translating due process, explain it as a formal way to resolve disagreements between families and the school if they're not able to understand a direct um, translation of due process. And then why is this important? Why does it matter? Because many terms have no direct equivalent in other languages or cultures. So you're going to have to adapt it so that they understand what the term means. Prepare in advance. I know sometimes they just call an interpreter in and they don't necessarily tell you what kind of meeting it is. But if you're able to prepare in advance, and this means if you're able to get a hold of the documents beforehand, review the documents, the IEPs, or the agendas ahead of the meetings so that you can identify unfamiliar or technical terms and be prepared. For example, you can use tools such as a bilingual glossary of common education and legal terms, and it's important because preparing reduces the risk of misinterpretation and it also builds your confidence in the work that you do. Use culturally appropriate analogies. When the concepts are unfamiliar, use examples that you are familiar with or culturally relevant comparisons. For example, when you have to explain what an individualized education program is, or as you can compare it to a personalized learning contract. And also, I know in English, they use a lot of acronyms. In certain languages, or in, for example, in Spanish, those acronyms do not exist. You have to spell out the whole word, right? Or say it. So if you're prepared for that, it makes things a little bit easier when you're explaining it to the parent or the family. And why does this matter? It matters because it helps bridge cultural gaps and supports understanding. Clarifying versus interpreting. So know when to ask the school staff to clarify a term instead of interpreting something inaccurately. I know many interpreters carry around a little tablet so that when they are not clear on something, they write it down and then ask for clarification. Please do this if you don't understand something instead of interpreting it in a wrong manner or a wrong fashion, because that will not help the family at all. For example, if you don't understand a particular term or acronym, ask the team to explain what FAPE or FAPE is or LRE in simpler language before interpreting. And also, why does this matter? Because it preserves accuracy while promoting understanding. But if you're prepared beforehand and you already have your glossary, this should make it easier because you'll already have what FAPE means, what FAPE means, what LRE means, IEP, etc. Also, try to avoid literal word for word translations. Focus on conveying the meaning and not the direct translation. For example, least restrictive environment, or LRE, might need a descriptive phrase instead of the literal translation. And it matters because its literal translations may confuse families or distort intent. And I know that when you're sitting down at an IEP meeting or a 504 or just a general meeting, a lot of these terms are repeated over and over again. So if you can describe it in a way that the families or the parents will understand it the first time, it just will get easier for them as the meeting goes on. Be transparent about difficult terms. Inform the family when the concept has no direct equivalent in their language, and then describe the meaning. For example, in English, this term means, and then follow it by an explanation. Why it matters? Because it builds trust and ensures families aren't being misled. And then you can use visual aids and written support when needed. Supplement oral interpretation with translated glossaries, charts, or diagrams when at all possible. You can use these translated versions of IEP forms, for example, the parent rights brochures, or even flow charts if that's going to make your job easier as an interpreter. Um, it matters because it reinforces their understanding, especially of all these complex topics. You have to remember that a lot of these families, it might be the first time they're dealing with this, especially if it's their first child in school, or even it's their first child being diagnosed with a certain disability, or even just their language, English language learners that are going to get different supports in school. So the easier you can make it for the parent to understand, the easier your job is. And then, of course, stay neutral, but support access. And we always hear that as interpreters and translators, right? Stay neutral, interpret without bias, but advocate for full access to information for your different families. For example, ensure families receive all of the necessary documents in their preferred language before meetings. I know that sometimes doesn't happen, but if you can have a say so when they call you to come and do this particular appointment or assignment, just ask them if they could please um, allow the parents to have all the necessary documents beforehand. And why does it matter? It upholds ethical standards and legal compliance. Engage in ongoing training. I know all of you are part of NATISL because you like to be on top of things and take all the different courses and professional development that's available to you. So continue participating in this type of seminars and presentations on education law and interpreter ethics. Different resources out there. I know there are several, but of course, NATISL would be number one. But then you can also use offerings from organizations like the National Council on Interpreting in Healthcare or local LEAs. And it matters because it keeps your skills current and ensures that interpreters are effective allies to our families. Okay, so now I'll hand it over to Sabrina, and she's going to go over the interpreter's role in family engagement and education law.
So consider yourself as an interpreter as a cultural liaison. You're not just bridging the language, but you're also supporting bridging the culture. You're ensuring that your interpretation is culturally responsive, and you are handling those sensitive topics with care. One of the things that I do want to go back to that can make it a little bit easier for you to ensure that families have access to copies in their preferred language is that you request that they provide you with a copy in the family's preferred language prior to the date of the meeting. And that will help the process to go smoother for you because families will have access to the information in their language, and it will make the meeting run much smoother. And it will also make your interpretation run more smoothly as well. Focus on advocacy through communication. During those meetings and during those other opportunities that you have to provide support, help families ask the right questions. Encourage their participation in various meetings, whether it's IEP 504 or just a general parent conference. Um, and make sure you continue to research strategies to remain neutral while supporting informed decision making, because ultimately your role there is to make sure that families understand what is happening in the meeting and what their rights are so that they can get the best information, the best opportunities for their children. Tools and resources that will come in handy for you, bilingual glossaries, keeping abreast of the information that is available on the USDOE website under the resources section for Section 504, the American Disabilities Act, as well as IDEA and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act documents. Um, Also keeping copies of and the updates of the multilingual parents' rights brochures that are available in your state. And some of these things are going to be very state specific on how they are distributed. So I would suggest that you spend a good deal of time surfing the internet on the state education site for the various states that you live in so that you fully understand where you can find the resources that you'll need to continue to educate yourself around the changes that may be happening in the landscape of your state. Also look at websites and organizations that offer legal education resources because they come in handy when it comes to staying abreast of changes and potential changes that are going to happen. So we have time to look at some case scenarios and some role playing. So this is a case scenario from an IEP meeting, and I'll give everyone an opportunity to read the scenario to themselves. So Ms. Ramirez is the mother of Diego, a 7-year-old bilingual student recently evaluated and found eligible for special education services under the category specific learning disability. The school has scheduled an IEP meeting to discuss services and accommodations. Mrs. Ramirez speaks limited English and has requested an interpreter. As the interpreter, you are present at the IEP meeting along with the special education teacher, the school psychologist, and the parent. The team begins using terms like least restrictive environment, pull-out resource services, reading fluency goals, and accommodations for standardized assessments. Ms. Ramirez looks confused but doesn't ask questions. The school team moves forward with recommending 60 minutes per day of resource services in a separate setting. So these are some of the questions that I want you to consider, and we'll give you an opportunity to jot down some notes. But the questions are: how can the interpreter ensure that Ms. Ramirez fully understands the educational terminology being used? What strategies should be used to clarify the terms, pull out, fluency goals, or LRE? And if the parent seems unsure or silent, what should the interpreter do? And also, how can the interpreter remain neutral while ensuring that Ms. Ramirez has equitable access to information and decision making? So I'd like you to take a few minutes just to think about those questions. And once you've had an opportunity to think through some things, you have a couple of options. We'd like for people to share out some of the strategies that they've used in the past to address these things. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing out loud to the group, we will pay attention to those comments that you may drop into the chat, and we will share them out with the group.
It looks like Gabriela, you want to participate? Go ahead.
Yes. I just finished my IEP meeting 2 minutes ago. Sorry, I'm late for that. So that is very appropriate on time. So I have a meeting right now, eligibility. And for example, terminology is being used. I can ask for the acronyms. I ask to the team very kind and say, and it repeat in English and in Spanish for mom. But I'm going to focus on the third one. If the parent seems unsure or silent, what should the interpreter do? In my experience, I saw mom when it's virtual meetings, like I do. I saw mom very silent and very her eyes rolling or looking another corner, and I say, "I'm sorry, I think mom has maybe a question." So that's is I asked mom, do you have any questions, mom? Or do you need any clarifications? And I repeat in Spanish first and in English. And the thing was very nice. And they say, oh yeah, I forgot to ask mom, she has any question. So that is my strategy I use. And yeah, mom was open to talk.
And I see that Henry Hank dropped into the chat that he continues to ask the parent questions as they progress about anything that the parent may not understand. So that's a way to ensure that you don't get all the way to the end of the meeting and the parent doesn't understand what's going on. So just to periodically through the course of the conversation, when information is provided, to just check in with the parent and say, do you understand what they mean by that? Ninfa shared, asked Ms. Ramirez if the terminology makes sense and asked if she needs clarification of the Spanish interpretation of the terms. If Ms. Ramirez seems unsure or silent, I would ask if she would like to add or have any concerns. Elizabeth said that as the interpreter, I can ask the team to explain in plain language, LRE, pull out, etc., and also raise my hand and state that it seems that the parent may need clarification and then check in with the parent. Those are all very good examples. Thank you for sharing. Coral shared that emphasizing before the meeting if the interpreter has any words or terms that may seem confusing, so that she can be sure to ask those questions as they arise. And then Laura shared, going back to one of the points made in the presentation, try not to provide a literal translation the terminology, instead use plain language to ensure the parent is following along and understands what's happening. Gabriella shared, having a glossary and reviewing before the meeting any terms that may potentially come up. So just looking at the questions to make sure that we have some solid examples in all of the 4 areas. Thank everyone for sharing. I think we probably did cover all the questions. Stephanie also shared that she would address these things in her pre-session by asking the team to explain any acronyms that might come up, and also asking them to make sure that during the meeting they say things in the simplest language possible, and letting the parent know in advance that the purpose of you being there is to provide support and to help them best understand what's happening. So all of these are very good examples. Ensuring that Ms. Ramirez fully understands by checking in with her, making sure in advance you are aware of the terminology that might come up based on the type of meeting it is. Using those strategies we talked about not using literal interpretations to explain pull out, fluency, LRE. Paying attention to the parent's body language. If the parent seems unsure or extremely quiet, just asking for clarification on behalf of the parent to make sure that everything is clear as they move forward. And all those things are still being done in a way that is neutral, because you are just asking the parent to, ask questions or asking questions on their behalf to ensure that everyone understands what's going on throughout the course of the meeting. And just being mindful as an interpreter, there are certain acronyms, thank you, Gabriella, that come up time and time again. So to always be prepared on the front end with your notes to be able to share in the simplest terms what those acronyms mean to families. So I think at this time we can look at closing and some of our key takeaways.
Okay.
And that'll give us an opportunity for questions at the end.
Okay. Someone had their hand raised. I think is it Heba?
Yes, that was me. But if you'd like to go on, and I can ask my question at the end, so I
Okay.
do not disrupt the
Oh,
flow.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank
You
you.
can ask your
You
question.
can
That's
ask it.
fine. Yeah.
Right. So I was just asking actually about the liberty we have as interpreters. So of course, with the acronyms, it's best to be familiar with them beforehand. But if within the session, especially for example, I work remotely through over the phone, so I don't really see them. I cannot see their expressions. I could only discern through the flow of the conversation. So I also wanted, my question is regarding our liberty. If we know what IEP stands for, but the teacher or the person responsible for the meeting only says IEP without actually stating what it stands for, do we have the liberty to go ahead and just explain what it means to the LEP right away without prior clarification based on what we know? Or do we always ask for clarification? What does this stand for and what does this mean before we can take the liberty of putting it into simpler words or explaining what it is?
So
Thank you so much.
you can address that in 2 ways, Heba. You can say, I'm sorry, I have a question. What does IEP stand for? I want to make sure that I explain it correctly to the parent. And of course, we know that you know what IEP stands for. However, you are advocating on behalf of the parent in a non-biased way when you do that, especially in the event that you can't see the parent's face. So, and you can even lead by saying, I'm sorry, I'm not sure the parent understands what IEP means. Can you clarify for me so that I can make sure I share the appropriate terminology with the parent? And you do have the liberty to do that.
Thank you very much.
No problem. And I have so much open on my screen right now. I don't see any other hands raised, but I think we're good. Okay.
There was another question in the chat. It says, is interpreting offered to parents only if the child or children attend public schools? What about private schools?
All families, whether it is public or private school, are protected by the Individuals with Disabilities Act, by the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as by the Section 504, as well as by the Civil Rights Act. So it does not matter what setting, what educational settings, parents are still afforded that right. Let me see if there was another question. So we are going to look at some of our role, why your role matters and key takeaways, and then we still have about 15 minutes left. So we'll be able to address any additional questions that come up or any additional questions that you all drop in the chat.
Okay.
So some key takeaways: making sure that you understand the major laws and the rights of families, and being clear and accurate and providing culturally appropriate communication for those families. Being confident in interpreting in educational settings. And of course, we know the way that we are most confident is by making sure we are the most knowledgeable and the most informed before we get into those settings. Serving as a bridge between staff and families. You do have the liberty when you are asked to participate and provide interpretation services to make suggestions. When a school invites you and they say to you, you know, what it is they're inviting you to interpret, you can suggest, you know what, guys, it would probably be a good idea if you make sure the parent has a copy in advance in their home language, because that means they'll be able to read ahead and it'll make the meeting go much smoother when it's time for, you know, us to get started. You have the liberty to do that because ultimately you are the bridge and your role is to interpret and ensure that families understand what's happening in the meeting. But you're also serving as a support to the school to ensure that the message that that the school wants to convey to the families is appropriately conveyed. And the people that are working in the schools, depending upon how diverse their population is, they may not have any experience in working with families that are non-English speaking or that need interpretation services. So sometimes you're helping them by giving them those little tips in advance about sending communication to families to prepare them for the meeting. Communicate educational terms with clarity and make sure that you continue to be an advocate for inclusive communication practices. We have a link on our website here, and that link to our website actually provides you with access to a lot of different resources that we have around family engagement. Our website is translated, so you can use the widget to select it in a language that is most beneficial to the families that you are supporting. And we also have resources on our website that are directly family facing, that are interpreted in the top 5 languages that are 6 languages, that are prevalent in Louisiana. And we continue to make that resource hub more robust based on the needs that we discover around our state. And with that, we can move to some question and answer. I see a couple of things have been dropped into the chat. Anna, you have your hand raised.
Yes, just wanted to thank you and Brenda and Lauren in the background for sharing this information. Absolutely, great and very, very useful to us as interpreters. I think many of you have mentioned how we are advocates for equal access to information, right? And as advocates, we need to make sure that we feel confident asking questions, clarifying any information that is given. and always involving the school personnel, right? We are very lucky that we work with educators and they love to educate and share information. So don't ever feel afraid of intervening. I know I see Laura, you make an excellent point that it is acceptable not to interrupt the flow of the meeting. You know, we have a lot of acronyms and abbreviations in special education and in education in general, and you would be interrupting the meeting every 5 minutes, right? If we did this. So I think there's a lot of preparation that needs to happen, a lot of education that needs to happen before any educational meeting so that we can have those conversations with educators about the difficulty of communicating some of this information even before we get to the meetings. So there's a lot of those conversations that do need to happen, but that collaboration with team members is important, especially if we come across a term that is unknown or is something that is very high register. It is important that we communicate that with we communicate with the educators to make sure that they give us a simplified version of that same term so that we as interpreters can communicate that to the family. So that collaboration has to happen, from the very beginning until the end of the meeting to make it effective. And the families too, right? They need to help us by asking additional questions and feeling comfortable, engaging in this process. So, but thank you so much for sharing this information.
And it's important that when you sit at the table as an interpreter, you are the expert in that room, and I come to you with experience as both a school district and state level administrator. You are the expert in the room. In many instances, we have not worked with a lot of families that require interpreters, and you can tell when you're in an environment where schools are experienced, because in an environment where schools are experienced and working with families that need interpretation services, they don't use acronyms. They don't use a lot of educational jargon. They know that families need to be spoken to with simple language, and they understand how they should be conducting the meeting. But when you're working with people that are new to this work, you really are helping them and you're providing a great support when you tell them things in advance. It's important in this meeting that you don't use a lot of acronyms when you're talking about certain things, that you say the full words so that, the parent understands better what it is you're referring to in the course of the meeting. And the meeting is going to run smoother, and they're going to appreciate the support that you gave them by, helping them to learn that.
I think Nympha has her hand up.
Yes,
Nympha,
thank you. And first of all, I wanted to thank you for the presentation. It's always very insightful, and I really appreciate those real life experiences that we could practice. I myself have experience working within a very diverse school district for about 10 years as a Spanish interpreter. And I would say, just as a helpful tip and something that I learned along the way, would be even if we do get called last minute, right, to attend to an IEP meeting, I think that it's always crucial and important for me as the interpreter to really state the guidelines that will allow for my flow of interpretation, as well as the understanding of the family or the parent that will be attending that needs the services. And so sometimes we don't have time for those pre-check-ins or to kind of have a conversation with the staff members that we're going to be working with. But I think it's always beneficial to at the beginning of the meeting, even prior to the introductions, to really state that we would like our staff members to stick to plain language and have this conversation in order for our our conversation to flow. A lot of the time, some of our educators or our staff members it might also be their first time conducting an IEP meeting, and their nervousness or uncertainty of whether or where the conversation is going to go, we tend to speak fast. And it's always a good reminder for our staff members to clarify that we need to keep a steady pace to allow interpretation, reminders of shorter phrases, as well as for the family. I know that sometimes our community members or family members that feel comfortable because there is an interpreter that understands their needs will also continue or prolong the conversation. And I apologize for the background noise. It's about the time that our pets are outside. But I think it's always good to state these rules with everyone as part of the team, as well as ensuring that when it's needed, as an interpreter, you always have that right to pause the conversation when there is a need for clarification. And even when once you've stated that the rules about acronyms and making sure that they're being spelled out at the beginning so everybody knows what's happening or what those mean, that our staff members also understand that if you're interrupting, it's because the use of acronyms or of not plain language is interrupting the understanding of the parent. So just some tips and things that I have learned that I consider have really helped and have really encouraged me to continue the advocacy. And I know that the first couple of times that I did have to interrupt some of the meetings, I did feel uncertainty, but now I feel empowered because that means that we're also conveying and continuing that conversation in a way that the family understands. Thank you.
Thank you, Nympha, for all that valuable information. And we appreciate the work that you've done for so many years. And I'm sure you've been able to help so many families. And I just want to say, I've done this work previously, and not every single case is unique. You're not going to have the same case twice or the same kind of meeting twice. Each meeting is just different. So, but the more you do it, it just gets a little bit easier because you start learning like the flow of it. And especially if you keep coming back to the same school and working with the same team, you start getting to know their personalities. So it's hard work, but just keep at it. And we truly need you out there to be able to help and advocate for all of the multilingual families. So we're coming to the end of our presentation today, and this is something we value your feedback. So please, we would appreciate if you scan this QR code and just complete the post survey below. We are a federally funded program, and we are able to provide our services at no cost to different school districts throughout the state, and in some cases, like in this case, at a national and international level. So please, if you're able to fill out this survey, we really will appreciate that so that we can get this data taken care of and just keep it for our records and also to send it off to our program director.
Thank you very much, Brenda and Gabriela. You had a question?
Yes, please. And thank you for just 1 minute. Experiences in the meetings I have, I can interpret everything to Spanish to English, English to Spanish. However, when the parents, I native speak Spanish, it's my first language. Parents speak Spanish and they explain me or they say what I had to interpret it, and I don't understand anything in Spanish. So I request, it's my same language, and I repeat in English, man, could you explain me in a different way? Even until 3 times I had to ask because I don't understand. They confuse themselves. They want to say, convey one message to the team, but later they think it different and immediately say a different thing and mix everything. So it's very confused to interpreter in English what I'm saying because I confuse the team and confuse myself. So in that case, Brenda, what can I do if parents are really confused in the same in her own language? Explain something.
Oh, that's a huge challenge.
Very huge challenge.
It's and I understand sometimes it's because of the level of education that the family comes with. They've never been exposed to anything like this before. That, you know, we know that most Latin American countries, these kind of programs do not exist. These kind of services don't even come up. They're not available at the schools that they've dealt with if their child was ever in school. So I would just say, just try, and of course, depending on what Latin American country you're from, our wording is different depending if you're from, Mexico and Cuba. Of course, words are going to mean different things. So if you're not familiar, you're of course sometimes not going to be able to understand what they're trying to convey, even if it's the same language. So I would just say, just try to just ask questions over and over again until you're comfortable with what they're trying to say. And I know that a lot of times you feel like time is ticking against you because they say this is only going to be like a 30-minute meeting, and maybe you're looking at the clock and the time's coming, but it's their right to be able to walk out of that meeting understanding what just happened, right? It's
And
their
it's also and it's
Go ahead.
also important to note, Brenda,
Yes.
that they can't predetermine the length of the meeting in advance. So they can't tell families that the meeting can only last 30 minutes.
Okay.
The meeting is to last until you come to a full resolution. Everybody understands and we're in agreement with what that IEP is going to state moving forward. There are some times when you might be called to be an interpreter at a meeting and it is not resolved in a single sitting. There have been times where IEP meetings have been occurring and there was a need for an additional service provider, and that was not clear. So the meeting was ended and then rescheduled to make sure that that additional person that was necessary was able to be present. So my suggestion mirrors what Brenda just advised, and that is to make sure that you ask as many clarifying questions as you can to make sure you fully understand the message that the parent is trying to convey, and then share that message out. And also understand that it's not just families sometimes that are non-English speakers that change their mind over the course of the meeting. That happens in instances where families are English speaking. They start out with, making the request for one accommodation, but as the meeting progresses, they decide, no, that they want something different. So I would just suggest asking a lot of clarifying questions, or even asking the parent, what do they ultimately want to happen at the end? Like, what is the result you want? Because that might help you to better understand what you need to convey on their behalf.
Thank you.
I hope that helps, Gabriela. And I know
it helps. Let's just finish
it's
my meeting. I was thinking about the meeting because mom changed her mind. She said yes.
And that's okay. And
And-
that's okay. But like, that was a wonderful tip that Sabrina said. If you just ask them ultimately, what do you want at the end of this meeting? What do you want to accomplish? Then that might help you guide, right, the parent. But I know it's frustrating. And again, I said every single meeting is so different from the one you probably just previously did, right? And the next one that you're going to have, because it's not a cookie cutter kind of thing. So just patience, and just, and know that what you're doing is very valuable, because you are helping. Ultimately, it's that child's success in education that you are going to accomplish, hopefully. And I just want to say thank you for all the wonderful comments, and I'm reading the chat and I really appreciate it. Hopefully this was valuable to you. And again, it's been our pleasure to be able to partner with Natisol and with Anna and Agostina for these 4 sessions that we did. We had one almost every single month on different topics relating to family engagement, the importance of it, bridging that gap between schools and families. And of course, we do many other things. If you go to our website, you'll be able to see what it is that we're doing here in Louisiana. to help our students succeed. And again, hopefully in 2026, we'll be able to do this once again, to be able to provide different types of topics and of interest to you. If you have any suggestions too, we welcome them. You can email them to us, or if you need to email Anna with them and she'll get them to us so that we know exactly what it is that you're looking for. And then if we can able to provide that to you, we'll be glad to do that. And thank you very much
Yes.
for spending your hour with us. And we appreciate it. And don't forget that survey. We would really appreciate that you fill it out. I believe that when you do the date, if you do 08/06/2025, that's how it's going to allow you to move forward with the survey. Again, you have to do the 2-digit month, 2-digit date, and 4-digit year to get through. And again, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. And again, wonderful work. Keep going.
Thank you, Brenda, very much. And thank you so much, Sabrina and Lauren. Thank you, of course, to the NATIZL team, those of you who are here, very much so. We are going to be sharing with you quite a bit of resources. I went ahead and put that on the chat earlier, but I know some of you just joined. Lots of resources, a certificate of attendance, a recording of the session. And Raquel, thank you so much. We are going to also send a survey. Just so that exactly what Brenda was saying, for you to let us know what topics you would like to see in the future. I'm going to love to continue this collaboration, but we are thrilled to be collaborating with many other national organizations as well. We just want to make sure that we bring content to you that is relevant, that is new, and it's fresh. So many things are moving very, very quickly right now. And we want to make sure that we are all informed. So feel free to access the survey that we will send to you via email as well, so that you can stay in touch. Okay. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And it's been a pleasure seeing all of you. Have a good rest of the week. Bye.